"Sir, this entrance is not for visitors." The words echoed across the glass lobby just as the man reached for the door handle. Several employees looked up from their desks. A delivery driver waiting near the reception area turned his head. Even the security guard standing beside the elevator glanced toward the entrance. The man paused and slowly lowered his hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed far more simply than most people entering the building that morning. His dark jacket showed signs of travel. His leather briefcase looked worn from years of use. Nothing about him suggested power. Nothing about him suggested wealth. Rachel Morgan stepped forward confidently, blocking the doorway before he could enter. As operations manager, she took pride in protecting the company's image. She believed details mattered. Presentation mattered. Standards mattered. And from where she stood, this stranger did not look like someone who belonged inside one of the most successful corporate headquarters in the city. The man looked at her calmly. There was no irritation in his face. No sign of embarrassment. Just quiet curiosity. "Are you sure?" he asked. The question was simple. Yet something about the way he said it made Rachel hesitate for half a second. Only half a second. Then her confidence returned. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Employee access is restricted. Visitors need to check in at the front desk." The man nodded slowly. "I understand." Rachel expected an argument. Most people argued. Most people immediately explained who they were or demanded special treatment. Instead, he simply stepped aside. His calm response somehow felt more unsettling than confrontation would have been. Nearby employees exchanged glances. The stranger did not seem offended. If anything, he appeared amused. Rachel folded her arms. "Can I help you with something?" The man glanced around the lobby before looking back at her. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows behind him, casting long reflections across the polished marble floor. The building buzzed with activity. Executives moved between conference rooms. Assistants hurried through hallways carrying tablets and folders. Yet, the man seemed completely unbothered by the growing attention. "I have a meeting," he said. Rachel nodded toward the reception desk. "Then someone can verify your appointment." Again, she expected resistance. Again, it never came. "That sounds reasonable," he replied. The receptionist looked surprised. So did the security guard. Rachel found herself slightly irritated by how cooperative he was being. Somehow his patience made her feel less certain. The man walked toward a seating area near the windows and sat down quietly. He placed his old briefcase beside his chair and looked out across the city skyline. Several employees whispered to each other. One junior manager passing through the lobby slowed down noticeably when he noticed the stranger. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face, but before he could approach, his phone rang and he hurried away. Rachel noticed. She noticed everything, yet she dismissed it. People recognized people all the time. It meant nothing. Upstairs, meanwhile, a boardroom filled with senior executives remained unusually empty. Coffee sat untouched on the conference table. Presentation screens glowed against the walls. Several directors checked their watches. One executive made another phone call. Another looked toward the door. The meeting was already running behind schedule. Back downstairs, the stranger calmly opened his briefcase and removed a thick stack of documents. He began reading as if he had nowhere else to be. Rachel watched him from across the lobby. Something about the scene felt strange. Most visitors checked their phones. Most looked nervous. This man looked completely comfortable, almost as if the building belonged to him. The thought annoyed her immediately. She turned away and focused on work. Yet minutes later, another executive hurried through the lobby, speaking urgently into a phone. Rachel overheard only a few words before he disappeared into an elevator. No, he should already be here. Moments later, another call. Another concerned expression. Another question repeated almost word for word. "Has he arrived yet?" Rachel frowned. The entire building seemed to be waiting for someone. But who? She glanced across the lobby once more. The stranger remained seated beneath the morning sunlight, calmly turning another page of the document in his hands. And for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly had the uncomfortable feeling that everyone upstairs might be waiting for him. Rachel Morgan remained standing near the entrance long after the stranger had taken his seat by the windows. She tried returning her attention to the morning reports on her tablet, but her concentration kept slipping. Across the lobby, the man sat with remarkable patience, occasionally turning a page in the thick document resting on his lap. He did not check his phone. He did not complain. He did not walk to the reception desk demanding answers. He simply waited. The unusual calmness bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Most visitors became restless after only a few minutes. This man looked as though he had all day. Around him, the headquarters continued operating at full speed. Employees crossed the lobby carrying coffee cups and presentation folders. Elevators opened and closed every few minutes. Large digital screens displayed company announcements and quarterly performance numbers. Yet beneath the normal activity, an undercurrent of tension was beginning to spread through the building. Upstairs, the executive conference room remained occupied but inactive. Several senior directors sat around a long polished table reviewing notes while repeatedly glancing toward the clock mounted on the wall. One vice president stood near the windows speaking quietly into his phone. Another refreshed his email every few seconds. Nobody seemed willing to start the meeting. Rachel noticed the unusual behavior through internal messages appearing on her tablet. Delayed. Waiting. Hold for arrival. The wording appeared again and again. She frowned. Whoever they were waiting for clearly mattered. A few minutes later, a young analyst hurried through the lobby carrying a stack of reports. The moment he noticed the man seated near the windows, he slowed dramatically. Confusion appeared across his face. He looked toward the elevators, then back toward the stranger, then continued walking. Rachel intercepted him before he disappeared. "Everything okay?" she asked. The analyst hesitated. "Yes, I think so. You think so?" He glanced back over his shoulder. That gentleman looked familiar. Rachel folded her arms. "Do you know him?" The analyst shook his head. "Not personally." Then he hurried away before she could ask another question. Rachel looked toward the waiting area again. The stranger remained completely absorbed in the document he was reading. Sunlight illuminated one side of his face, while the city skyline stretched behind him through the glass walls. He looked less like a visitor and more like someone reviewing something important. For reasons she could not explain, Rachel felt herself becoming increasingly curious. At the reception desk, two employees quietly discussed the situation. "Do you think that is him?" one whispered. "I have no idea," the other replied. Rachel caught only fragments of the conversation before they noticed her watching and immediately became silent. That only deepened her suspicion. Meanwhile, another executive rushed across the lobby and entered an elevator without even acknowledging anyone. His expression looked concerned. His phone remained pressed against his ear. As the elevator doors closed, Rachel heard him say, "No, nobody can reach him." A few minutes later, another call arrived at the front desk. The receptionist listened carefully before answering. "No, he is not checked in yet." Rachel looked up immediately. The receptionist quickly lowered her voice. Something was definitely happening. Across the room, the stranger calmly closed the document and placed it back inside his worn briefcase. Then he stood and walked toward a large display showcasing the company's mission statement. Several employees nearby instinctively moved out of his way, though none seemed to realize they were doing it. He studied the display for a moment. Respect, integrity, accountability. The three words stretched across the wall in polished silver lettering. A faint smile crossed his face. Not amusement, not criticism, something closer to reflection. Rachel watched from a distance. Then something unexpected happened. An older maintenance employee emerged from a side hallway carrying equipment. The moment he saw the stranger, his eyes widened. "Good morning," the man said warmly. The stranger smiled. "Good morning." The maintenance worker nodded with obvious respect before continuing on his way. Rachel stared after him. She had worked beside that employee for years. He rarely greeted executives that enthusiastically, yet he had greeted this stranger as if he already knew him. The feeling in Rachel's stomach tightened. Upstairs, the delayed meeting entered its second hour. Downstairs, the mystery only deepened. And standing in the center of the lobby, looking up at the company's mission statement, the stranger seemed completely unaware that half the building was beginning to wonder exactly who he was. By mid-morning, the atmosphere inside the headquarters had changed completely. What began as a routine delay was slowly becoming a problem nobody seemed willing to explain. Emails continued arriving. Phones continued ringing. Executives continued checking their watches. Yet the most important meeting of the quarter remained frozen in place. Rachel Morgan stood near the reception area reviewing updates on her tablet, but her attention kept drifting toward the stranger in the lobby. He had returned to the seating area beside the windows and was once again reading through the thick stack of documents from his briefcase. Every movement appeared deliberate. Every expression remained calm. Nothing about him suggested concern. That alone made him unusual. Most visitors became anxious when schedules changed. Most executives became frustrated when meetings ran late. This man seemed completely unaffected by either. Across the building, people were beginning to notice. A group of department managers exited an elevator and immediately scanned the lobby before continuing toward a conference room. One of them paused briefly when he noticed the stranger. The manager opened his mouth as if preparing to say something, then suddenly stopped and kept walking. Rachel noticed. Again, it was happening too often to ignore. The stranger seemed familiar to people throughout the company, yet nobody approached him directly. Meanwhile, the delay upstairs was becoming impossible to hide. Through internal communication channels, urgent messages continued circulating among senior leadership. Several directors had already postponed other appointments. Financial analysts waited with presentation materials prepared. Legal advisors remained on standby. Yet nobody seemed willing to begin without one specific person. Rachel finally approached the receptionist. "Do you know what is going on?" she asked quietly. The receptionist hesitated. "Not exactly. That is not exactly an answer." The receptionist lowered her voice further. "I only know the executive team keeps asking whether someone has arrived." Rachel glanced toward the seating area. "Do they say who?" No, the uncertainty only deepened her frustration. Across the lobby, the stranger closed another document and looked out through the massive windows overlooking the city. Sunlight reflected across nearby glass surfaces, creating bright patterns that shifted across the floor. He appeared thoughtful, reflective, almost as if he were evaluating something larger than the building itself. A few minutes later, another unusual moment occurred. The company's chief legal officer emerged from an elevator while speaking into a phone. He looked stressed. His pace was quick. His expression was serious. Then his eyes landed on the stranger. Instantly, he stopped walking. For a brief moment, genuine surprise crossed his face. The legal officer ended the call without another word. Rachel watched closely. Surely now someone would explain what was happening. Instead, the executive simply nodded respectfully toward the stranger. The stranger returned the nod. Nothing else happened. The legal officer then turned around and disappeared back into the elevator. Rachel stared after him in disbelief. Even the receptionist looked confused. The stranger, meanwhile, seemed entirely unconcerned by the interaction. He calmly returned to reading. Several employees had now begun whispering openly. The mystery was becoming impossible to ignore. "Who is he?" one assistant quietly asked another. "I do not know," came the reply. "But everyone important seems to recognize him." Rachel heard the exchange and felt a small knot tighten in her stomach. For the first time all morning, doubt began pushing against her certainty. She replayed the conversation at the door. His calm voice. His confidence. The simple question he had asked. "Are you sure?" The memory felt different now. Less like a challenge. More like a warning she had failed to understand. Upstairs, tension finally reached a breaking point. A message appeared simultaneously on multiple executive devices. Several senior leaders immediately left the conference room. Elevators began moving. Doors opened across multiple floors. People who rarely appeared in public areas suddenly started heading toward the lobby. Rachel noticed the shift immediately. So did everyone else. Something important was about to happen. Yet the most remarkable detail remained unchanged. At the center of the growing uncertainty sat the stranger with the worn briefcase, quietly reviewing a thick contract as though the entire building were not slowly rearranging itself around his arrival. The lobby no longer felt like a lobby. It felt like the center of a mystery that was slowly unfolding in front of hundreds of people. Employees who normally rushed between meetings had started finding reasons to linger nearby. Receptionists checked their screens less often and glanced toward the waiting area more frequently. Even the security guard near the elevators seemed unusually attentive. At the center of it all sat the stranger with the worn briefcase, quietly reviewing documents while an entire corporate headquarters appeared to be adjusting itself around his presence. Rachel Morgan stood near the reception desk pretending to review operational reports, but she had stopped reading several minutes earlier. Her eyes kept returning to the same question. Who was he? The answer seemed close enough to touch, yet nobody would say it. Across the lobby, the stranger carefully closed another folder and placed it back into his briefcase. For the first time that morning, Rachel noticed the cover page. A contract. Thick, detailed, filled with legal attachments. Even from a distance, it looked important. The man glanced briefly at his watch before returning his attention to the city skyline beyond the windows. He looked patient, comfortable, as though delays meant nothing to him. Then the elevators opened. 3 senior executives stepped into the lobby. Conversations immediately quieted. These were not ordinary managers. These were leaders who rarely left the executive floor during major meetings. Yet all 3 scanned the room the moment they arrived. Rachel watched carefully. The executives spotted the stranger almost instantly. Their expressions changed. Not surprise. Relief. One of them even smiled. Rachel felt a strange chill run through her stomach. Before she could process what she was seeing, the executives approached the seating area. The stranger stood politely as they arrived. The group exchanged a few quiet words Rachel could not hear. Then something unexpected happened. The executives nodded respectfully before returning upstairs. Respectfully. Rachel blinked. She knew those people. She had worked beside them for years. They did not behave that way toward ordinary visitors. Nearby employees noticed it too. Whispering spread through the lobby. The uncertainty was growing stronger by the minute. Rachel finally walked toward the stranger. She had spent too much of the morning watching events happen around her. She needed answers. The man looked up as she approached. Once again, his expression remained calm. "Is there something I can help you with?" she asked. The question sounded professional. Yet even she could hear the curiosity beneath it. The man smiled slightly. "I think everything is moving exactly as it should." Rachel frowned. "You seem very confident about that." "Should I not be?" The answer caught her off guard. Not because it sounded arrogant. Because it sounded sincere. He genuinely seemed to believe it. Rachel looked toward the elevators. "A lot of important people seem interested in your arrival." "Do they?" he asked. "You have not noticed?" His smile widened slightly. "I try not to assume what other people are thinking." The response felt strangely familiar. It carried the same quiet wisdom she had sensed earlier. Rachel found herself becoming defensive without fully understanding why. Most visitors would probably be concerned after waiting this long. Most visitors are probably here for different reasons. Rachel crossed her arms. "And what reason are you here for?" For the first time all morning, the stranger paused before answering. He looked down at the briefcase resting beside his chair. Then he looked back at her. To make a decision. Rachel glanced toward the thick contract. A decision about what? The man considered the question. About what kind of company this should be. The words landed with unexpected weight. Before Rachel could respond, movement near the elevators drew everyone's attention. Several additional executives emerged. More than before. Department heads, senior directors, members of the legal team, people whose calendars were normally impossible to access. The entire lobby seemed to stop moving. Phones lowered. Conversations ended. Eyes turned toward the growing group. Rachel followed their gaze. Every single one of them was walking toward the stranger. And for the first time since that morning began, she started wondering whether stopping him at the door had been the biggest mistake of her career. The moment the group of senior executives entered the lobby, the atmosphere changed in a way Rachel Morgan had never experienced before. It was not loud. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made an announcement. Yet every person in the building seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. Employees stopped walking. Conversations faded. Even the sound of ringing phones seemed less important. The stranger with the worn briefcase remained exactly where he was, standing beside the seating area near the windows. His expression had not changed. He looked as calm as he had when Rachel stopped him at the door hours earlier. The executives approached him with purpose. Rachel recognized every face. Division presidents, legal leadership, financial officers, people whose schedules were planned weeks in advance. Seeing them gathered together outside a boardroom was unusual. Seeing them all heading toward one person was extraordinary. The stranger greeted each of them with a polite nod. Nothing more. Yet the respect in their responses was impossible to miss. Rachel felt her confidence beginning to crack. Nearby employees exchanged nervous glances. The whispers that had filled the lobby all morning suddenly disappeared. Everyone was watching. One of the senior directors stepped forward holding a folder. "We have been waiting," he said. The stranger smiled faintly. "I noticed." Several executives laughed quietly. Not because the comment was funny, but because it released some of the tension that had built throughout the morning. Rachel stared. These were people known for demanding results and controlling rooms. Yet around this man, they seemed unusually careful. The stranger accepted the folder and opened it. Inside were documents nearly identical to the contract he had been reviewing all morning. He turned several pages without speaking. The silence grew heavier. Finally, he stopped. His eyes settled on a specific section. The expression on his face remained thoughtful. "Has anything changed?" he asked. One of the legal officers shook his head. "No," another executive added. "We reviewed every recommendation." The stranger nodded slowly. Rachel noticed something unsettling. Nobody was leading the conversation except him. Not formally, not obviously. Yet everyone seemed to be waiting for his opinion, waiting for his decision. The realization sent another wave of uncertainty through her. Across the lobby, employees continued gathering at a respectful distance. Some stood near elevators. Others lingered beside reception desks. Nobody wanted to leave. Whatever was happening felt too important. The stranger closed the folder. "Then my concerns remain the same." The words were calm, measured, yet several executives immediately exchanged worried looks. Rachel caught that reaction. So did everyone else. One financial officer stepped forward. "We are talking about $10 million. The stranger looked at him. "I know exactly how much we are talking about." Nobody responded. The silence that followed felt different. Heavier. More serious. Rachel's eyes moved from one executive to another. $10 million. The number echoed in her mind. Whatever decision was being discussed clearly affected the entire company. Yet the stranger remained completely composed. He glanced toward the company mission statement mounted on the wall. Respect. Integrity. Accountability. The silver letters reflected sunlight across the lobby. Then he looked back at the executives. "If those words mean anything," he said quietly, "then the answer should already be obvious." The statement landed like a stone in still water. Nobody argued. Nobody challenged him. Several executives lowered their eyes. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. She still did not understand who he was, but she was beginning to understand something else. The contract was not merely about money. It was about principle, about values, about a choice bigger than profit. The stranger picked up his briefcase. For the first time all morning, he looked ready to leave the waiting area. Every executive immediately straightened. Every employee watched. Rachel stood frozen as the man she had stopped at the door prepared to make a decision that appeared capable of changing the future of the entire company. And deep inside, she could no longer escape the growing fear that she had completely misunderstood the most important person in the building. The stranger stood with his briefcase in one hand and the contract folder in the other, while an unusual silence settled over the lobby. It was the kind of silence that appears only when people realize they are witnessing something important. Employees remained frozen near reception. Executives waited nearby. Even visitors passing through the building seemed to sense that a pivotal moment was approaching. Rachel Morgan stood several yards away, unable to look anywhere except at the man she had stopped that morning. Hours earlier, he had appeared to be nothing more than an unexpected visitor. Now some of the most powerful leaders in the company were hanging on every word he spoke. Yet the strangest part was that nothing about his behavior had changed. He remained calm, respectful, patient. The same man who had quietly accepted being turned away at the entrance was standing before them now. One of the financial officers cleared his throat. "We still have time to reconsider." The stranger looked at him thoughtfully. "Do we?" The executive hesitated. $10 million is a significant opportunity. Several others nodded. Rachel listened carefully. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same issue. The contract, the amount, the decision. The stranger slowly opened the folder once more. He reviewed several pages while sunlight streamed through the glass walls behind him. The bright reflections stretched across the polished floor and illuminated the company values displayed on the wall nearby. Respect, integrity, accountability. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, the stranger closed the folder again. "How many complaints were documented?" he asked. The legal officer answered immediately. 23. "And how many were verified?" "All 23. Another silence followed. Rachel noticed several executives looking uncomfortable. She still lacked the full story, but pieces were beginning to connect. The contract was not being questioned because of profitability. Something else was involved. Something deeper. The stranger looked around the lobby. His gaze briefly settled on the mission statement before returning to the executives. Then why are we still discussing it? No one answered immediately. The question seemed simple, yet it carried enough weight to quiet the entire room. One vice president finally spoke. Because walking away will cost us. The stranger nodded slowly. And keeping it will cost us something else. Rachel felt those words land harder than any argument she had heard all day. Nearby employees exchanged glances. They understood it too. This was no longer a conversation about money. It was a conversation about identity. About what kind of company they wanted to be. The stranger placed the folder back into his briefcase. Then he looked toward the elevators leading to the executive floor. I think everyone already knows the right answer. One of the directors lowered his eyes. Another quietly nodded. The tension in the room shifted. For the first time, Rachel noticed something remarkable. Nobody was trying to convince him anymore. Nobody was debating. They were listening, as though the decision had already been made, and they were simply finding the courage to accept it. The stranger checked his watch. How long has the meeting been delayed? Nearly 2 hours, someone answered. A faint smile crossed his face. Then we should not keep everyone waiting. Several executives visibly relaxed. Rachel frowned. The statement confused her. If he was merely a visitor, why would the meeting begin because he was ready? The question repeated inside her mind. Then another detail surfaced. Every executive had followed his lead. Every conversation revolved around his judgment. Every concern centered around his arrival. The realization was close now. She could feel it. Yet somehow she still could not fully grasp it. The stranger began walking toward the elevators. Instantly, the entire executive group moved with him. Not ahead of him. Not beside him. With him. The distinction mattered. Rachel watched in disbelief. As the group approached the elevator bank, one senior director turned toward a nearby assistant. Please notify the board that we are ready to begin. The assistant nodded immediately. Ready to begin. Those words echoed through Rachel's thoughts. Because suddenly she understood something that sent a chill through her entire body. The meeting had never been waiting for a document. It had never been waiting for legal approval. It had never been waiting for a contract review. The entire company had been waiting for him. Rachel Morgan stood frozen near the reception desk as the elevator doors closed behind the stranger and the group of executives who had followed him. For several seconds, nobody in the lobby moved. The silence felt unreal. Employees looked at one another as if waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. No explanation came. Then the whispers started. Quiet at first, then louder. Questions moved through the crowd like waves. Who was he? Why had the board delayed an entire meeting for one person? Why did every senior leader treat him with such respect? Rachel felt her pulse pounding. The answer was close now. She could feel it. Yet part of her was afraid to hear it. Minutes later, her tablet vibrated. A company-wide notification appeared across internal systems. Meeting update. Executive board session, now in progress. Rachel opened the message automatically. The first line stole the air from her lungs. Executive board review led by Chief Executive Officer Malcolm Carter. She stared at the screen. Then she read it again. Malcolm Carter, Chief Executive Officer. The words refused to make sense. Her eyes moved back to the elevators. The man she had stopped at the entrance. The man she had asked to wait. The man she had treated like an outsider. He was not a visitor. He was not a contractor. He was not a prospective client. He was the CEO. Several nearby employees received the same notification. Audible gasps spread through the lobby. One receptionist covered her mouth. A young analyst looked genuinely stunned. Even the security guard slowly shook his head. Rachel felt heat rise into her face. Every moment from that morning replayed in painful detail. Sir, this entrance is not for visitors. Employee access is restricted. Visitors need to check in at the front desk. She remembered the way Malcolm had responded. No anger. No arrogance. No attempt to reveal who he was. Just patience. Across the building, another message appeared. This one summarized the purpose of the executive session. Rachel opened it immediately. Her eyes moved through the document, then stopped. The contract. The $10 million agreement. The deal that had dominated executive discussions for weeks. Malcolm Carter was recommending its immediate termination. Not because of financial concerns. Not because of performance issues. Because an investigation had confirmed repeated discriminatory treatment toward employees at the partner organization. 23 complaints. 23 verified cases. Rachel sat down slowly. The realization hit harder than the first revelation. Malcolm was not merely the CEO. He was willing to walk away from $10 million to protect company values. Respect, integrity, accountability. The same words displayed on the wall downstairs. Suddenly his comment from earlier made perfect sense. If those words mean anything, then the answer should already be obvious. He had not been speaking like a visitor. He had been speaking like the person ultimately responsible for the company's future. Upstairs, inside the executive boardroom, Malcolm sat at the head of a long conference table. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city below. Directors, legal advisors, and senior executives filled every seat. The contract rested in front of him. So did the investigation report. Malcolm looked around the room. Profit matters, he said calmly. But character matters more. Nobody interrupted. If we compromise our principles when money becomes involved, then our principles were never real to begin with. Several board members nodded. Others lowered their eyes thoughtfully. Malcolm opened the report one final time. Then he signed the termination approval. The room remained silent. $10 million. Gone with a single signature. Yet instead of disappointment, something unexpected appeared on many faces. Relief. Because deep down, everyone knew it had been the right decision. Downstairs, Rachel stared through the lobby windows at the city beyond. The mystery was over. The truth was finally clear. But as she remembered the kindness Malcolm had shown her despite everything, she realized the most shocking part of the day was not discovering that he was the CEO. It was discovering that even after being judged, dismissed, and stopped at his own company's door, he had still chosen dignity over humiliation and principle over power. The executive meeting ended nearly 3 hours later. By the time the boardroom doors opened, afternoon sunlight had begun stretching across the city skyline. Employees throughout the headquarters were still talking about what had happened. The decision to terminate the $10 million contract had already spread through internal communication channels. Some people were surprised. Others were relieved. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Malcolm Carter had proven that the company's values were more than words printed on a wall. Down in the lobby, Rachel Morgan remained at her desk, though she had accomplished very little work since the revelation. Every time she looked toward the entrance, she remembered the moment she had stopped Malcolm. The memory felt heavier now, not because he was the CEO, because she realized how quickly she had judged someone she knew nothing about. The elevator doors opened. Conversations throughout the lobby immediately softened. Malcolm stepped out surrounded by several senior executives. Yet once again, he did not carry himself like the most powerful person in the building. He thanked board members individually. He paused to shake hands with administrative staff. He smiled at the maintenance employee who had greeted him earlier that morning. The respect people showed him was impressive. The respect he showed them was even more remarkable. Rachel watched him cross the lobby. Her heart began beating faster. She knew she needed to speak with him. The longer she waited, the worse it would become. Malcolm reached the reception area and paused. Several executives continued toward the exit while he remained behind. For a brief moment, the lobby grew quiet again. Rachel took a slow breath and stepped forward. Mr. Carter. Malcolm turned toward her. His expression remained calm, exactly as it had been that morning. Rachel suddenly found it difficult to speak. She had rehearsed several versions of an apology in her head, yet none felt adequate. I owe you an apology, she finally said. Malcolm listened without interrupting. When you arrived this morning, I made assumptions about you. Rachel lowered her eyes briefly. I judged you based on how you looked instead of treating you with the respect every person deserves. The words felt painfully honest. Around them, several nearby employees quietly looked away to give them privacy. Malcolm remained silent for a moment. Then he smiled gently. Thank you for saying that. Rachel blinked. She expected disappointment, perhaps frustration. Instead, she found kindness. Somehow that made the situation even harder. You had every reason to correct me, she said. You could have told me who you were. Malcolm glanced toward the glass entrance doors. Sunlight reflected across the floor where they had first met hours earlier. Would it have mattered? He asked softly. Rachel hesitated. The answer came. Immediately. Yes. Malcolm nodded. Then that is the problem. The words were not cruel. They were not accusatory. They were simply true. Rachel felt them settle deep inside her. Malcolm continued. Respect should not depend on a title. Rachel looked down. You are right. For a moment neither spoke. Then Rachel gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been bothering her all day. Why did you cancel the contract? Malcolm looked surprised. You know about that? Rachel nodded. Malcolm considered the question carefully. Because 23 people trusted us to listen. He glanced toward the company mission statement displayed on the wall. If we ignored them because the contract was valuable, then everything we claimed to stand for would become meaningless. Rachel followed his gaze. Respect, integrity, accountability. For the first time, the words felt real. Not corporate language. Real principles. Malcolm picked up his briefcase. Every company eventually decides what matters most. Rachel looked at him. And what matters most to you? A small smile appeared on his face. People. The answer came without hesitation. Without calculation. Just certainty. Rachel felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Not because of his position. Not because of the contract. Because she finally understood the difference between authority and leadership. Malcolm extended his hand. Rachel shook it. The gesture lasted only a second, but it felt like the closing of a chapter. As Malcolm turned toward the exit, Rachel realized something important. The greatest lesson of the day had not come from discovering who he was. It came from discovering who he remained, even when nobody thought he mattered. 2 weeks later, the headquarters felt different. The building itself had not changed. The same glass walls reflected the morning sun. The same elevators carried employees between floors. The same conference rooms hosted meetings and presentations. Yet something subtle had shifted inside the culture of the company. People listened more carefully. Conversations felt more respectful. Small acts of consideration appeared throughout the building in ways that rarely happened before. The change was not dramatic. It was human. Rachel Morgan noticed it every day. On a quiet Tuesday morning, she stood near the same entrance where she had first stopped Malcolm Carter. Employees streamed through the doors carrying laptops, coffee cups, and presentation folders. Delivery drivers arrived with packages. Maintenance workers moved equipment through the lobby. Visitors checked in at reception. Rachel greeted each person with the same courtesy. Not because someone had instructed her to do so, because she had learned something she never wanted to forget. Near the entrance, a young courier entered carrying several boxes. His clothes were simple. His shoes showed signs of wear. A few weeks earlier, Rachel might have barely noticed him. This time she walked over immediately. Good morning, she said warmly. Can I help you find where those need to go? The courier smiled with obvious relief. Thank you. Rachel helped direct him toward the correct department. The interaction lasted less than a minute. Yet as she returned to her desk, she found herself thinking about Malcolm's words. Respect should not depend on a title. Upstairs, another board meeting was taking place. Unlike the previous one, there was no crisis. No major contract debate. No urgent decision hanging over the company. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, Malcolm sat among directors reviewing long-term plans for growth and employee development. He listened more than he spoke. When others presented ideas, he gave them his full attention. The same quiet confidence that had confused Rachel weeks earlier remained unchanged. Power had never been the most interesting thing about him. Character was. Later that afternoon, Malcolm left the boardroom and walked through the lobby on his way out of the building. Several employees greeted him by name. He greeted each of them back. Receptionists, analysts, security staff, maintenance workers. Every interaction felt genuine. Rachel watched from a distance and smiled. He had not changed after the events of that morning. He remained exactly who he had always been. That realization carried its own lesson. Character is easiest when circumstances are favorable. True character appears when circumstances are not. As Malcolm approached the entrance, he noticed Rachel helping an elderly visitor locate a meeting room. The conversation was simple, polite, respectful. After the visitor walked away, Rachel turned and saw him standing nearby. Their eyes met briefly. Neither mentioned the morning that had brought them together. They no longer needed to. Malcolm simply smiled. Rachel smiled back. It was enough. Outside, late afternoon sunlight illuminated the city streets beyond the glass doors. Employees began leaving for the day. The lobby slowly emptied. The pace of the building softened. Malcolm stepped through the entrance and paused for a moment on the sidewalk. Behind him, the company continued moving forward. Ahead of him, the city stretched beneath a sky painted with shades of gold and blue. He adjusted the strap of his worn briefcase and started walking. Through the glass, Rachel watched him disappear into the crowd. Not as the CEO, not as the man who canceled a $10 million contract, not as the most powerful person in the company, but as a person whose actions had quietly reminded an entire organization what its values were supposed to mean. The sunlight reflected across the lobby floor exactly where their story had begun. The doors opened. The doors closed. People came and went. Yet the lesson remained. Every person has a story. Every person deserves dignity. And sometimes the strongest kind of leadership is not found in authority at all. It is found in the simple choice to treat others with respect long before you know who they are.